All righty. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited for you to be joining us tonight. We will get started in just 1 minute. We're going to give folks another second to log in. While people are logging on, we invite you all to just drop a note in the chat saying hello, introducing yourselves, and saying where you are joining us from tonight. Amazing. Already I see people from Connecticut, New Jersey, Miami, California, Alabama, Illinois, Arkansas, Michigan, Portland, New Jersey, New York, Tennessee, Houston. Ooh, all over the place. I cannot even keep up.
I know, they're so fast.
We are so excited to have you all here tonight. All right. In the interest of time, while some of our friends are still joining us, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our second session of the Resilience Through Poetry Workshop Series. My name is Katie Bonner, and I'm a senior manager with the Scholastic Awards. I am so excited to be here with you all today. I am joined by two amazing writers and presenters who you should recognize Christine, but we will introduce you again shortly. And I'm also excited to introduce you to Christian in a minute. I'm also joined by my colleague, Suneen, who you'll see bopping around in the chat later and in the Q&A answering some questions. And we are so thrilled to be joined by you all. As a reminder, the Resilience Through Poetry Workshop Series is sponsored by the New York Life Foundation and features 3 sessions with 3 different alumni of the Scholastic Awards. Last week, we kicked things off with Alexa Russell, who spoke about translating your emotions into words. And you can catch up with Alexa's presentation if you missed it on YouTube here. Let me just get the link. And well, I'll get it after I change my screen share in a second. You'll find it. I'll drop it in later. But you can catch up with Alexa's presentation on YouTube. And tonight we are talking about writing through uncomfortable feelings with Christian and Kristine. And then next week will be our last session. We'll be talking about exploring emotional imagery with Darius Adifat Peckham and Kristine. And just a reminder, the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards are open to all teens in grades 7 through 12, ages 13 and up, who reside in the US territories, US military bases, and Canada. And teens whose work deals with grief and bereavement or personal loss may be eligible for scholarships up to $1,000 through the New York Life Award. For more information, you can visit artandwriting.org. And we will have a follow-up session on October 26th that all participants are invited to, where we will be talking a ton more about the Scholastic Awards. So tonight we invite you to really engage with Christian's information and writing through uncomfortable feelings. And we have plenty more time to talk about the Scholastic Awards for those who are interested. And we also invite you to drop questions in the chat throughout the evening. So you'll be asked at different times to use the usual chat box to engage in some activities, but we have a Q&A box at the very bottoms of your screens. You can see it in the bottom panel. It should just say Q&A and look like 2 little dialogue boxes. You might have to click the 3 dots that say more to find it. If you have questions for Christian or Kristine, we invite you to drop them in the Q&A box there. You can use the tools in there to upvote each other's questions so that we know which questions are the most popular. And that will help us prioritize at the end of the evening when we have as much time as we can, but still never enough time to really delve into things with these 2 incredible writers and people. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce Christine Brickey, who is a longtime educator and a friend of the Scholastic Awards. Christine has been working with us for years and as somebody who has judged and reviewed a ton of Scholastic Awards entries. She is also the author of memoirs and fiction, including They Said She Was Crazy and Flowers for Rodney. And she is the founder of KEB's Brick House Studio, where she now leads writing and healing workshops and retreats. And we are also joined by Christian Butterfield, a class of 2019 National Student Poet and Scholastic Awards Gold Medalist. Christian is now in college where he continues writing and orating, and I will let him share more about himself. I turn it over to you, Christine and Christian.
Hello, Christine and Christian. That has such a fun ring
I
to it,
know.
like a little like crime fighting duo, just like solving crimes in the seas section of the library, in the case. Hello. This is so lovely. Heck yeah, writing through uncomfortable feelings. The writing, a little uncomfortable, but the work at the end, a lot of beauty coming from that uncomfortableness, which I think is very, very lovely. It's I think one of the hardest things about grief writing is that like it's something so inherently uncomfortable, right? You're kind of looking into the things and parts of your life that can be a little difficult. And I think like diving into those can be a little intimidating sometimes. So hopefully we can make the uncomfortable feel a little bit more comfortable, or at the very least, a little bit more purposeful and helpful and powering through that discomfort. Next slide. This is me. Hi, my name's Christian Butterfield. I was the National Student Poet of the Southeast back in 2019, and I'm a Scholastic Gold Medalist in poetry and personal memoir. I have since published some work in the Kenyan Review and the North American Review, and I work for an online literary magazine named Ex Post Magazine, which is lovely. And I think we're going to send the link to the little piece I had in Kenyan Review called Blue Whale Challenge sometime soon. I'm currently a sophomore at Western Kentucky University. I study creative writing and international affairs, pretty much anything that isn't math. And I compete on our little national championship speech and debate team. I love talking. Here I am. This is me. I'm dressed as Flavor Flav from Flavor of Love at a little viewing party. I made the clock myself. Quite lovely. And so now I've spent all this time introducing me, but what I really want to know is about you. Next slide. So, hello again. I wanted to start off by just like reading one of my favorite ever poems. I love it so much that it is literally the background on my iPhone. There's a little poem right here. I love it so much. It's the little mantra I repeat to myself, and I want to repeat it to y'all. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. That's the beginning of Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. I agree, whoever just chatted so good. I agree. It's so wonderful. And this right here is Mary Oliver living her best life, holding a shell. And she's also holding my heart in her hand when she says that. And I hope y'all's as well, because I feel like so often, especially when we're writing, thinking about how to improve our writing and make it more readable for other people, we think about we have to be good. We have to like use our pain for something generative and just something beautiful. And that's all fine and well. But I think it's really important to begin with a reminder that you do not have to be good. You are doing this process. You are engaging with your work. You are pursuing what you love because of you. And all you have to do is let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Whoever said, please add Psychen, bro. I wish I could. I should, I'll add Richard Psychen. Yeah. And so now, I've talked about you, but I want to know from you. So every time I run a workshop or talk to a group of students, I always am an opportunist. You guys are so cool, and I want to steal your little knowledge of cool things that I should also be into. So in the Zoom chat, I want you to like recommend some piece of media, a book, a movie, an album, a poem, literally anything that you love. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I heard somebody say Psychen before I even started asking recommendations. So maybe throw something by Richard Psychen in there. Okay. I'm just going to pick some at random. And let's see how this works. Oh, these are all so amazing. Okay. Let's see. Oh, these are all so cool. I wish I could read all of these right now. One on Me by Joanna Newsom. Everybody's been telling me listen to Joanna Newsom, and now the person who wrote that comment's also telling me, so I'm adding that to the to listen to list.
Pride and Prejudice is on there.
Ooh, okay. Okay.
Rupee. Oh, yeah, Rupee.
Oh, love Ruby.
Handmaid's Tale. Yes.
Ooh.
Oh, Little Fires Everywhere. Oh, they're going right to my YA lit
Ooh.
heart.
Yes, yes. And I think what we are doing is we are adding some to a little collage of recommendations from y'all. I also encourage you to maybe just take a little picture of the list on your phone if you have it on you, screenshot anything that looks interesting. But let's see.
Crank.
Yes.
Cummings. Got a Minecraft on there. Little Women.
Ooh, the color purple.
Oh, yeah. All the Light We Cannot See. Oh,
Little Fires Everywhere. I've been meaning
yeah.
to read that.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Billy Collins. Oh, I love Billy Collins.
Right?
Seeing a lot of Phoebe Bridgers. Yeah, yeah.
Divergent. Anxious People.
Yes.
Oh, Les Miserables.
Oh, these are so awesome.
Marie Lou's in there. Her book Legend.
Ugh. Okay, these all look really cool. I wish I could include all of the hundreds and hundreds of things y'all are recommending because I literally want to stop this and just read all of these right now. That will be my activity right after this workshop. But for right now, this is our little collage. I'm very excited to dive into these things. In fact, I'm gonna take a little picture for me because these are wonderful. And I love everybody in the chat also like yelling Mitski because like same. I love this for us. So now that we have some wonderful recommendations, I love that we're all supporting Mitski together. That's lovely. So now that we have our lovely little recommendations, the things of ourselves all coming together, and I appreciate you guys giving me some new reading material. Really do. Let's talk about grief. Let's go to the next slide. So, before we like dive into writing about grief, writing about trauma, writing about the negative things that happen in our lives, I think there are a couple of things that we really need to keep in mind that might go against the kind of common grain of advice we hear about grief or the type of grief writing that we might typically see, right? So, two really big things. First, writing about your grief isn't mandatory. You don't have to do it. And that sounds like such a basic thing, like, and it sounds counterintuitive in a workshop where we're talking about writing our grief, right? But it's important to note that you don't have to take every single negative experience in your life and the day after put that into a poem. Sometimes you need space away from it to process. Sometimes the poetry isn't going to be the thing that heals you. Yeah, like I saw somebody comment that you sometimes feel like you have to exploit your own grief for writing, and it's so true, and it's so easy to do that, right? And so there's this wonderful essay by T. Kira Madden that you can find in lithub.com, and it's called Against Catharsis, Writing is Not Therapy. And I'll quote it here. It must be so healing to write memoir, is something I hear no fewer than a few times a day. It must be so therapeutic, so cathartic. It is very healing, I said. And I may have believed that. I may have believed that to write the thing down is to take one step away from the thing itself. I wanted my memoir to feel like the story. Look at it, feel it even. I have wrangled it all into something beautiful. Of course I have healed, because I was able to write it. The story itself is the proof. And I found myself relating to T. Kira Madden really hard when she said this, right? Because so often you want to like be able to take the negative things that happen in your life and transcribe them into something beautiful, make it feel like all of those things were worth it. I remember I was watching BoJack Horseman. One of the characters, Diane, had this wonderful metaphor about like this broken pot, and how in some cultures they'll like take a broken pot and use gold to actively like clear it back up, right? So they'll like, instead of glue, they'll use gold. And so like from that shattering, it turns into something beautiful. And then when she was writing, she was a memoirist, she was like, I want my work to be that golden broken vase, and it's not. And if it's not, then what did that tragedy even mean? And I think that's a question that we can sometimes ask ourselves a lot as people who write about negative things. If we don't turn it into something beautiful, then did it mean anything? And the answer is yes. It means something because you are human. You went through that experience. You grew. It shaped you into the person you are today. And whether or not you write about it, it's intangibly yours, right? And so then that raises the question of when and why do we write about grief? right? And so what T. Kara Manning kind of furthers is saying that writing isn't catharsis in the way that we think. A lot of times people who aren't writers might think like, oh, poetry is like a diary entry. You get really emotional and then you write it all down and then boom, you have this art. And so the more pain you have, the better the art will be. Whereas she says something that was really revelatory to me, in that poetry writing or writing in general isn't necessarily about, it isn't that like the more pain you have, the better the product will be, but rather that writing itself is a form of work and that you need to be oriented towards an audience sometimes. So sometimes it's not about the first draft where you're feeling super cathartic and you're getting out all of the emotions, isn't necessarily the draft that you're going to end up submitting anywhere, end up showing other people to read, because it's a kind of separate exercise to write for yourself versus to write for somebody else, to write the thing that you need to hear for your own emotions, to create that beautiful product for somebody else to read. And so what I want to say is that when you write something, you can write something for yourself and also write something that's for the world around you, but they're kind of two separate processes. And oftentimes you need to write the thing for you before you're able to make it readable and engaging for other people. And that's okay. You know, you don't have to necessarily write everything negative that happens to you if you don't want to. And you don't have to exploit your own grief, because it's really easy to feel like you do. And the second thing that I want to say is that grief writing doesn't have to look like grief writing. And that sounds really weird, but I feel like so often we have these really hyper specific narratives about how we think grief is supposed to look. I mean, typically when we think grief, it's a specific person. They passed. We loved that person. They're not here anymore. We feel very sad about it. We heal, right? But we grieve things all the time that are often more intangible than that, right? Many of you might be watching this and saying like, okay, like I have many uncomfortable feelings that don't look like grief, right? Like you could be grieving a loss of an opportunity, loss of a culture, your home ecosystem, so many things, so many different types of sadnesses and traumas and negative feelings that you aren't able to put into an easy box. And then when you do have those things you feel sad about and negative about, you might not necessarily feel the right type of sad or negative. You know, you might also think that like, oh, sometimes I'm supposed to feel positively towards the thing that I'm grieving, or, oh, I'm supposed to know exactly what I'm grieving. I'm supposed to feel these like close bonds of connection to maybe past family members or certain institutions that you were supposed to connect to. And maybe the thing that you're grieving is that you aren't, right? And so what happens when we have these like really traditional grief narratives is that we aren't able to validate our own feelings when they fit outside of this. I like to call it ersatz grief. And if you don't know the word ersatz, you just replace it with the word weird. Weird grief. Because weird grief is weird. Sometimes it doesn't fit with sometimes it's discordant to the expectations we have of what grief is supposed to look like. And that can be uncomfortable, right? To kind of hold yourself against these social expectations of, I'm supposed to feel like this and I don't. I don't even know how to label my own feelings because this label hasn't existed yet. And that can be really challenging. And so there's this wonderful collection of lyric essays, which kind of like blend prose and poetry together, by Claudia Rankine, called Don't Let Me Be Lonely. And she writes this: forgiveness, I finally decide, is not the death of amnesia, nor is it a form of madness, as Rita claims. For the one who forgives, it is simply a death, a dying down in the heart, the position of the already dead. It is the end of living through the understanding that this has happened, is happening, happens, period. It is a feeling of nothingness that cannot be communicated to another, an absence, a bottomless vacancy held by the living. Beyond all that is hatred or love. This is a weird ersatz form of grief, right? I mean, typically when we think about grief, we think of grieving, something that we had a positive, fond connection to. Oftentimes we think that when somebody passes, we have to forgive them in order to heal, right? Whereas for Claudia Rankine, she's grieving the fact that she has to forgive in the first place. She's grieving the empty space left behind when she can't validate her own self compared to the traditional narratives of grief. She has all these like weird emotions about how grief is supposed to look. And if she was just trying to write an essay where she said, oh, I don't know if I can forgive. I should forgive, but I can't. I wish I forgived. Then, you know, it would just be a traditional grief narrative. Or if she just decided to forgive the person she wanted to forgive, then it would just be the traditional expectation of what she's supposed to be doing. However, Claudia Rankine instead decided to write about the fact that she can't forgive in the first place, and that's the grief. Because grief can be towards this intangible thing. Our uncomfortable feelings don't have to have a specific target. They don't have to be tangent to social expectations. And oftentimes some of the best, most intriguing writing happens from those types of uncomfortable griefs that are uncomfortable because you don't know if you're supposed to be feeling them and you don't know how to label them. I encourage you, if you'd like to look to read Don't Let Me Be Lonely by Claudia Rankine. It's a wonderful collection. And I think this quote really encapsulated the difficulty of grief sometimes, in that you're not only managing all of those uncomfortable feelings, but you're also managing how you're supposed to feel about those uncomfortable feelings. So I guess in sum, as you go into writing about your uncomfortable feelings, remember that A, you don't have to write about everything, and B, you don't have to write about uncomfortable feelings in the way that people specifically expect you to write about uncomfortable feelings. And I think both of those things are super important. And I learned that when I wrote a little something of my own and had a little hair funeral. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. Next slide. So as you might notice, the head on my hair is sparse. You can see it here. I'll do a whole 360 and everything. I don't know how well that's working, but this is my hairline. But I used to have really long, lovely hair. It went down to my little shoulders. I thought I looked gorgeous, and I did look gorgeous. However, male pattern baldness runs in my family, right? My older brother went bald at 16. My dad went bald in his 20s. His dad went bald in his 20s. I mean, just going against historical expectations here, the fact that I had this long hair at age 19, I was saying something. I was breaking the odds. And I spent my entire life, my entire childhood up to that point, I was using minoxidil shampoo. I wouldn't wear caps. I would obsessively maintain my hair as well as I could. But then it started falling out, because genetically speaking, my hair was only designed to last so long. I have androgenic alopecia is the name for it. And I was mad. I was upset. I was angry. I was not having it at all. And so, I did what I could to kind of compensate for the hair. You'll see, I was at a speech tournament and I had a speech about RuPaul's Drag Race. So I just covered myself with a wig for half of the speech. I remember I was in New York and I specifically, 5 minutes into getting into Times Square, I was like, we need to go to a tourist shop and I need to get a touristy hat, because I didn't want anybody to see my bald spot. And even then, when I was taking pictures, I would look through all the pictures I have and orient the one that you couldn't see the back of my head. This was a picture of me winning an award at some speech tournament in the red suit. And I had so many pictures that were great, but you could see this patch right here. And I was like, no. We gotta get the side profile. This is where it looks like I have hair cascading down. And so I had a lot of reasons that I was into my hair. I mean, on one side of it, it was aesthetic. I thought I looked really cute, but also there was a weird grief about losing my hair because it was connected to the grief about my family. And so I'm going to share something a little vulnerable, and I share it because I've taken the time to process it enough that it's able to go from this cathartic thing to something that I feel comfortable sharing and writing and talking about. But I'm currently not on speaking terms with my father. He is terminally ill, and because of a childhood of maybe some negative behavior, I decided about a year ago to cut contact, right? And so I spent a lot of time thinking about my writing and my father and the relationship between the two. And in writing about my father, I realized that one of the things I was grieving is both him and kind of the empty space left behind in my childhood where, the right father should have been. And so when my hair started falling out, I felt this really weird grief about both the hair and him, because remember, I get the baldness from my dad's side of the family, and I kind of wrote, and I remember I started writing this essay for a creative nonfiction class, comparing kind of the empty space left by my father to the empty space left in my head, that it was just another thing I had inherited. And I had a hard time reconciling with that. I felt like the hair I had was a sense of distancing from that grief, and then losing it, I not only had to lose this hair, which I liked, I looked like Janis Joplin, it was wonderful, but I also had to lose that sense of distance. And so in a first draft of an essay, or a little lyric essay, kind of a long poem even about this, I wrote what I have here. My father is dying, and I am 19, only a boy, with a dying man's hairline. And when I turn 20, I will shave it. I'll shave it myself, and I'll hold a funeral. I'll find an empty plot of dirt, bury the strands, and hope it grows a garden. And so when I wrote that, I just thought of a piece of lyric, a piece of metaphor. It just made sense, right? If I worried that the head on my hair was this empty space left by him, then that's leaving space for something good to grow, right? And then I turned 19, I turned 20, sorry, a couple weeks ago. And a couple days before, I thought, I know this was just a piece of lyric, but what if I actually did it? So next slide. What if I held a hair funeral? I remember just on my close friend story, I had the wackiest little time deciding to. Oh, thank you. Happy belated birthday. Thank you. Ha ha ha. I had the wackiest little time. I was like, I'm a sucker for a themed party. You saw me in the Flavor Flav outfit. I can throw a themed party. And I said, what if I held a hair funeral? And so I was just batting around this idea. And on my close friend story, had my closest friends, just the elites were on there, and I wrote like a long essay, honestly, between like multiple posts about my hair. So I said, hey baddies, so warning in advance, this is going to be wacky as hell. So many of y'all know that I'm planning on shaving my head on my birthday this Friday. I absolutely love my long hair, and I'm very scared to shave it off, but I'm going bald and want to have some agency over the hair situation. My hair will likely never grow back, so I wanted to make that change on a date that meant something, my 20th birthday. I'm shaving my head because I think it'll look better, but it's more than that. It's about aesthetics, but really it's about grief and it's about control. And you can't really see this, but I made a timeline like months before where I said my hairline goes bye-bye forever, which really jump scared me when I got a notification on Instagram saying hairline goes bye-bye forever. And I was like, oh no. And then it was like, yeah, okay, let's shave it. And then I said, trigger warning, father's mortality. The men in my family go bald quick. My brother lost his hair at 16. My dad in his early 20s. My long hair was a form of distance. Some of y'all know this, some of y'all don't, but I carried him off, and I've spent my life since trying to understand what I've inherited, what traumas I still carry, which makes inheriting his bald spot a weirdly painful experience. For me, shaving my head is about emotional agency. As in, my hair didn't abandon me, I chose to shave it. And as I approach my birthday, I've been writing about the experience, and at the end of the first draft of an essay about this all, I wrote this, and I shared the same thing. And then I had another just like single shot story where it was like, I want to hold a literal hair funeral. And then I wrote this. Sounds ridiculously weird when I write it out, but I have no plans for my actual birthday, and I've been thinking about the head shaving for quite a while. And I think that represents a lot of grief. I think I need to honor that grief. Because it's genuinely quite weird to have an estranged dying parent. None of the grief ever feels like you're allowed to own it until suddenly you cry when you see your hair in the mirror. I had this idea fairly recently, and then I got the news about my dad, and it all just felt urgent. So what I'm imagining is like I read the little essay, shave my head, have a little spot, I bury the little strands, and then I grow a garden. By growing a garden, I mean literally just getting dinner, have a fun little time, doing something not sad afterwards. I might be the weirdest birthday party theme ever, and I know people are dealing with a separate dad grief, so like no pressure at all. But if any of y'all come, like, any of y'all free Friday afternoon, I think it'd be something very fun, beautiful. And I had a little poll. It was very camp, honestly. And then I decided, let's go ahead and have a hair funeral. Next slide. Most sane poet birthday party. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. You're so real for that. He was a little invite. Christian's 20th birthday and hair funeral. 7 p.m. tonight behind Cherry Hall. Hope I look good bald, LOL. Graphic design, all different types of art, right? So there are some pictures. I couldn't attach the video, but I actually, like, for one last rodeo, I sang like Willow Smith's like Whip My Hair Back and Forth, and everybody else just kind of like whip along with me. It was so lovely. I had everybody like go around because so many people didn't know each other. There were like about 15 attendees, decently sized crowd given the occasion. And so I had everybody introduce themselves by saying what type of hat I should invest in. We thought about like a little bowler cap. And then as Willow Smith's Whip My Hair Back and Forth was playing, and I whipped my hair hard enough that I had a headache, I had my friend go ahead and here we are, shaved head. And you'll notice my friend Mauricio right here has a grocery bag because literally I saved the hair. And I'm going to use it to grow a plant, a very cute plant, because apparently, which I did not know, I'm not a scientist, hair is actually quite good for plant growth because it's like protein, and the little plants are like, oh my gosh, we can use this for our little cells and grow into something beautiful from the empty space. And I was like, I love when metaphors work, you know? And so this was a weirdly emotional birthday party for me. You know, I read the full essay because that was just the end of it. I read everything about it, and it was at once fun and sad and a little terrifying. You know, I was like, what if this is disproportionate? What if I look like the Coco Melon baby? But at the end of it, I realized that that experience is a lot of what grief is. You know, it is uncomfortable, not only because it's constantly like sad or dour, but because you're managing all of these different emotions at once. You're managing that joy and sadness and terror and nervousness, and you don't know if you're supposed to be feeling any of it. And you have to write all through it. And you have to create something in spite of all that, right? And so I remember it was one of the weirder birthday parties I've had. And I think it was a necessary way of validating my grief, you know, because I think humans, we memorialize our grief and our tragedy. And like I probably won't attend my father's funeral, but I realized that this type of grief, this ersatz grief living on top of my head, was a real grief. That grief of the empty space was as real as a grief of a loving father passing away would be. And that deserved ritual and memorialization just as much. And I think that moment for me was the time where I really allowed myself to say, I'm having these uncomfortable feelings and I'm allowed to label them grief. And I think that was really, really important on my end. And I think it's really important for y'all to give yourself permission when you guys write to validate the weird, discordant ersatz griefs and traumas and sadnesses and uncomfortable feelings and all the swirl of feelings happening at once. It's really important for you guys to give yourself validation to express those and feel those and manage those however you need to. You know, very different emotions can exist at once. You can have a extremely sad little essay about your dying father, and you can also have a little graphic invite that you made on Pixart. And those things are both as true as each other. And I think that's where the discomfort can come from. And I think that's where the beauty comes from as well.
Christian, can I jump in and just add to that? This
Yes.
whole thing that you're talking about is so important. It's where the title for my book, They Said She Was Crazy, came from, because after I lost my son, my rule was whatever I need to do is what I need to get through this is what I need to do. And there are so many different emotions, and you feel sometimes like the things that you're feeling are crazy, and that I worried that other people were looking at me going, oh, and I was able to put a lot of those things into that book. And that's where the title came from. They said she was crazy, because I felt a lot that people thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. Like, I grieved buying a half gallon of milk in the store, opened the section and pulled out a half gallon of milk and lost it in the store, because I didn't need to buy a gallon of milk anymore because my son wasn't here to drink it. And it was like, I'm crying because I'm buying a half gallon of milk, but it was a valid feeling. So all those things are so important. And I can see that in the chat, everybody is like so pro what you're talking about here. And that makes me very happy for how easily they're able to express that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that as well, because the grief comes so randomly. You know, you never really expect it until it's there and it's right in front of you. And I'm seeing a common theme in the chat as things pop up about this kind of amorphous general sense of grief at an unjust world. You know, and I mean, yeah, I feel that as well, especially as a young person. I'm close to y'all's age as well. And you know, the climate crisis and systemic inequities and all of those things, it can feel so frustrating and dramatic and uncomfortable managing all of that stuff, but there's no specific thing necessarily that you can point to and be like, this is the thing I am grieving, because it's as big as an amorphous just blob of problems, and it can be hard to manage that. And there's so many different swirls of emotions that it's these weird kind of singular moments where all of this kind of amorphous generalized grief can kind of bubble up, you know? And I think it's really important to honor and validate that personally, even when it isn't the most, even when it is ersatz, when it's weird. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do, both as writers. I think just in general, one of my favorite quotes on writing is revise towards strangeness. We like surprise, we like things that are weird, and I guarantee you, if you're feeling these weird emotions you don't know how to process, I'm sure many people are feeling similar ones. So it makes for great writing, but it also makes for great healing, or at the very least, great living as a human. It lets you process and feel what you need to feel. And I think both in terms of our practice as a poet and a person, I think it's very important to hear yourself when it comes to grief. And so we're talking about hearing ourselves, but how do we kind of render that? How do we kind of make that into something generative if that's what we want to do? And I have two kind of examples of some pieces that I love that do two very different things with grief and discomfort on the next slide. So I have two lovely, lovely pieces. The first is one poem from a collection of poetry by Victoria Chang called Obits. And so what this poem does is it essentially looks, it talks about Victoria Chang's mother dying through a series of obituaries, to all sorts of different things about her mother, right? And so this poem is to Secrets. Secrets died on August 7th, 2015, and they were relieved to die. No one at the funeral had known about my mother's illness. No one had known how fiercely my mother and father fought. One Chinese face after another. I told the story, told it again, their mouths open like time. Later, I found a photo of my mother smiling with her friends at her home. No oxygen tank, no tube in her nose. She must have taken it off, put it in the closet between the beginning of her life and the end of her life. I imagine her panicking inside, waiting for them to leave. The mind and speech assemble and disassemble like geese. Scientists now say a mind still works after the body has died, that there's a burst of brain energy. Then maybe she heard the geese above disassemble one last time. Then maybe my kiss on her cheek felt like lightning. I adore this poem and this collection, and I think it's because this collection kind of pays homage to the kind of thing that me and especially Kristine was talking about, of like having these very specific objects or specific things that spark your grief. And whether they're specific objects like the half gallon of milk, or these kind of more amorphous things like these one specific aspect of your mother, like the secrets she kept, her pride. And I think that as writers, oftentimes specificity is where we find some of the most interesting things in our work, because we can most interesting insights and images in our work is through specific things. And I think in our grief, it's kind of similar in that oftentimes the most specific way to get into the best way to get into the grief is, the specific things about who we're grieving, what we're grieving. And I think Obits by Victoria Chang does a really good job of articulating the difficulty of kind of finding grief everywhere. And I think that's sometimes something that happens a lot. And so this other piece, it's long. I will not read the entire thing, but I'm going to sum it up a little bit. This is a long essay with another essay attached to it. It's kind of wacky. And it's about the question of how do we render awkward grief and discomfort when we still have other people around us who are grieving? How do we manage I feel like part of our discomfort and uncomfortableness with our grief and how we process sadness is in part based around the fact that like other people have expectations of how we're supposed to grieve. Maybe it's hard to forgive. Maybe it's like hard to not forgive because others expect you to forgive. Maybe the way we talk about the dead is sometimes a promise to the living, right? And so I think this piece does a really wonderful job of articulating that difficulty in kind of reconciling those shared negative experiences and managing everybody's kind of emotions. And so this piece, there was an essay published in a print journal called, there's an essay published in a print journal written by Jennifer London. She basically talks about this awkward experience with her mother that she remembered back in her childhood. And then she republished this essay as Evidence in Track Changes, published in Diagram magazine. And it's so cool. Basically, she has this essay about her mom and her memories of her mom and how it wasn't the most happy childhood and some lightly traumatic things. And then her mom can go in and add track changes. So basically, it's kind of like on a Google Doc, somebody will add comments, right? So she can add comments to the work, and then the author, Jennifer London, responds to the mom's comments. It's really quite fascinating. And I think it's this really brilliant structure because the mom can like comment on the work and it can exist alongside the work while also not necessarily abnegating or totally getting rid of the original intention and original perspective of the piece. Because I think when it comes to tragedy and discomfort and negative emotions, I think one of the hard things about it is that we all have different perspectives, different memories, different things that resonated with us. We're all going to react to our grief and trauma very differently in ways that can conflict with each other. And oftentimes that's the awkwardness. And I think sometimes as a writer, what we can do is to kind of frame those perspectives against each other, to think, how does my perspective now change versus then, from one person to another, from truth to reality. And I think as a person, it can both kind of help us develop empathy for other people's perspectives and how they interact with us. And I think even more importantly, allow us to understand that their perspective doesn't have to be our reality. I think it's really important about this piece that within this essay, Jennifer London got to feel and express her grief as an essay. And you didn't see like parentheses with the mom's comments within the essay. No, her grief is a separate thing that deserves respect. And her mother's thoughts about that grief, her separate memories, her separate perspectives were valid. They made sense. She added them in on the side, and they are real, but they are just as real as her grief and her perspective, and that one doesn't negate the other, and that she's allowing herself to hold that space. And I encourage you, when I say things like, you don't have to write about grief, or grief writing doesn't have to look like grief writing, I think those are kind of more specific ways of saying that you have the space to share your own emotions, how and when you want to share them. And I think this piece does a really great job of displaying the awkwardness of the bravery that requires, because it can be brave to share your own emotions in a world where people have emotions that conflict and react negatively to them, to show that vulnerability. And that vulnerability, that bravery, can be uncomfortable. But I think it's necessary, both as practicing poets and as people who are going to grieve things and are going to live with that grief and live with yourself. And so that's one thing I love about this piece. And it's one thing that I hope you guys carry with you, is to understand your emotions as something that deserves to be viewed for themselves, to be seen and heard just for themselves, because that's really what matters. Your grief is allowed to be awkward. You are allowed to be Ersatz, and you can share them out into the world, but that's your grief. I think that's important. And so from all of this, I have a couple of prompts on the next slide that I think are hopefully a little bit generative. Now, I'd encourage you, while I'm talking right now, if you have like a piece of paper, or you want to open a new tab on your computer or the notes app on your phone, just to kind of scribble some things down, get some writing started. I have a few prompts inspired by the text, right? So you can go ahead, grab some physical, open up a new tab on your computer, your notes app, go crazy. So here are 3 wonderful little prompts. First, in the style of Victoria Chang's obits, write an obituary to an object or image or theme related to your grief, especially an image that feels tangent or unrelated, that you might not think of immediately at first, or something that feels kind of like specific or surprising in that way, in the sense that we wouldn't expect to be grieving a half gallon of milk. What things you might not expect to be grieving, or what things might be emblematic of those broad amorphous griefs that you're feeling, right? The second one, Ersatz grief as revised memory. So we talked about in Jennifer London's piece about evidence and track changes, the disconnect between our perspectives. And so write something, literally a poem, an essay, a story, literally anything that considers the disconnects, disagreements about your perception of your grief or trauma, or literally just anything, in the past versus in the present. You know, your perception right now versus your versus other characters or people in that theme's perspectives, your perception versus objective reality. You know, things linger in our brain for longer than others. We have our emotions and backgrounds all shape what we care about and how we perceive different things, and that looks different for everybody. So maybe write something, anything that explores that disconnect, what's similar, what's different. And finally, this is quite broad, and I would encourage you to both take this as a specific prompt and take this as just more generative permission. Ersatz grief as permission. Write a poem or essay or story or literally anything else you want that gives yourself permission to feel what you have been hesitant to feel, say what you have been hesitant to say, and grieve how or what you have been hesitant to grieve. You know, I think sometimes the best writing can come from those things. And I think more importantly, if it doesn't leave the catharsis stage that it's in right now, if it doesn't leave the writing for you and then the writing to be read out inside the world, you're still giving yourself permission to feel what you need to feel. And that's very, very, very important. So I want to give you all some time to go ahead and get some writing done. How much time do we think we should?
I would say 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
That'll leave about 10 for questions.
Great. 5 minutes. Heck yeah. I'm gonna scroll through the chat while we're right.
All right, you guys, if you can find a good place to stop for now.
If you guys want to share a golden line, so maybe just like a favorite line or image from your work, or maybe even just like what it's about, or what you're thinking about talking about, or literally anything you want just about the work, feel free to throw that in the chat. That would be quite lovely.
Christian, I think you're typing out the answer to this one, but I feel like they would all benefit from a quick answer to this question of how did you become a national student poet?
Yeah, so the process is quite intuitive. The program submit basically anybody who submits poetry, who is a high school sophomore or junior, is considered for the National Student Poets Program. So literally all you have to do is just, if you are of that age, just send in your work and they will consider you for it. And then if they follow up with you, they'll typically ask for maybe some more poems or kind of like an interview, just some extra additional materials, and then they will choose 5 national student poets from there. And one thing I would really, 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 really encourage you to do is, if you don't think you'll get it, submit. Submit. Because honestly, when I submitted to the Scholastic Art Writing Awards, I submitted for the first time ever in 2019 when I won National Student Poets. I did not expect to win a gold key so much as a gold medal, so much as National Student Poets. I was flabbergasted. Flabbergasted. And they chose my work. Right? And so I would encourage all of you, if you are not sure about submitting, go ahead and submit. Go ahead and submit. It can only do good things for you. Like, what's gonna happen if say if it's not the perfect piece of work and they're like nobody's gonna like come to your house and throw tomatoes at you? No, you just submit again later, you know. But if it's great, they're like, woo, throw your work. You just throw your work in the pile. You deserve it. Your work deserves it.
And don't you think that that just is such a confidence builder too? The more you are able to write and share in different venues and submit pieces, it's just it just makes you be a stronger, more confident writer, because you learn, it doesn't matter what this person or that person thought, it's how you feel about it, and it just gives you that confidence to keep doing it.
Yes, yes. I think just in general, there's so many people in the world, so many forces telling you no. Don't also be a force telling yourself no. There's enough of that. You're no all the time. Don't tell yourself no.
So this was a question that just came up, and I'm not sure, I don't want to butcher your name. Is it Marouj Sharif? So is asking for advice. What advice would you give to help aspiring artists find their distinct style? Said, we have the social obligation to be distinct and different, especially when building art that alludes to being holistic. So what advice would you give to help young writers find their distinct style?
You know, I think it's twofold. Hey, this might sound counterintuitive, but I think reading other people's stuff is really, really helpful. I think that just in general, like, there's nothing everything we kind of do is a little bit derivative, right? We're building off the kind of canon of work that everybody's kind of constructed just by reading and putting down things out in the world and being influenced by each other. And I think that when you read a lot of the stuff you want to write one day, you both, from a craft perspective, you kind of pick up the writer's like sense of detail, their imagery. You pick up like a lot of the great like habits that you can kind of then terraform with your own really amazing insights and specific images from your life and your experience. But it also just kind of gives you a greater sense of what the landscape is out there. Like, what does it mean to be distinct and different? Like, when you don't, what does being distinct mean? If you don't like have a sense of who you are being distinct from, right? And so I think just in general, reading things that you love and enjoy is really helpful to developing your own sense of self. And
Well,
also, I think that, oh yeah.
I would just say, don't you also think that, I know when I read other people, there's things where I've read where I've been, oh, I want to make sure I don't write like that. I want to add, you know what I mean? Like you get
Yeah.
bumped into that.
Yeah, I was being optimistic. I was like, the things you love. You can also see the things you
Well,
don't love.
that too, right? But then there's
Distinct
also
from
those
that.
other ones where you're like, oh, I don't ever want to.
Yeah, yeah. Like, what do we really definitely want to be distinct from, right? And
Right,
also, I
yeah.
think, yeah, and I think that what makes a lot of that writing shine is the specificity. I think it's you'll probably see a lot of the like images or the imagery or like the language they use are very like specific to them, and they spend a while developing their own personal voice. And I think that part of developing your own personal voice is thinking like, what insights do you bring to the table that maybe somebody else wouldn't? What pieces from your life or your experience, memories, the like possibilities or imaginations you might have that other people won't? And I think that leaning into the specific there is really helpful for making yourself distinct, because it's like, take love, right? Everybody feels love of some form, but you feel your own specific, unique type of love with its own symbols and signs and different things related to it. And so when you're writing about love, the way to make it distinct is to make it specific to you, because that's what makes it distinct from all the general forms of love that everyone else is writing about, right?
So I guess we have time for one more quick one. Jackie wrote earlier she wrote, I feel like the worst part isn't the grief, but it's forgetting the memories. And then later commented, I feel like it's sad when you move on. And as I read this over and over, I'm not sure if they meant forgetting as in when there's things that you forget about what it is you're grieving, or if forgetting as in intentionally trying to not think about them, or actually forgetting them, but both sides of that work. And I was just curious what your take is on that.
You know, I think that's one of the that's a really good question. I think that really one of the keystones of grief and uncomfortable feelings is that it's kind of uncomfortable from all sides of things, right? I think that oftentimes um there's this weird discomfort about how we're supposed to be feeling. And I think that's very evident in the fact that we sometimes like feel this grief about the grief not being greedy enough, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of times the uncomfortable feelings come from when our feelings are discordant from the way we're supposed to be feeling or been told we're supposed to be feeling. And so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I just love the way that Jackie phrased that, because I think it isn't, I think that is just such a part of grief, is
Mhm.
forgetting or realizing you've forgotten certain parts, whether it's a person or whatever it is that you're grieving. But I don't know, there was something about that really struck a chord with me and ties in so much with the uncomfortable feelings aspect of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, to the person who asked what type of debate I do, I did Congress in high school, and now I do speech, to extempore, impromptu, and poi.
Katie, we're almost at 8:00 here. Is there something that you want to remind them of for next week before?
Yes, thank you, Christine. So just a reminder that we are meeting again next week for our third session of the series with Darius Adithat Peckham. We will be talking about emotional imagery. You can use the same Zoom link that you used to join tonight's session next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific for anyone who's counting. And we also invite everyone who has attended at least one of these sessions back again on October 26th for a peer review session, where we will be joined by Christine, Christian, Alexa, and Darius. I know we didn't get to all of the questions tonight, but there will be more time then for you to talk to all three of these incredible writers. So please join us back again. And I will drop the link to register for the peer review session in the chat.
Katie, is the link for the YouTube, are they separate links for each of these sessions?
great question. So right now, only one session is up on YouTube. They will all be on one playlist. But for now, you can access last week's video here, and we will email you all a link to the video from tonight once it's up on YouTube.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Christian.
guys. Thank you, Christine. Thank you all for being here. This is so lovely. Oh, yay.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Christine. Kristen. Christian. Oh my gosh. Christine and Christian, thank you. It has been such a pleasure having you today. A huge thanks to Sumeen for answering so many questions in the chat tonight.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. We hope to see you back again next week. Have a great night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.